Welcome to another English language class. My name is Happiness Demo, and today we are going to study past tenses. This is the second part of our lesson on tenses in the theme grammatical accuracy. Now, before we go into our lesson, let's take a look at the objectives for this lesson. By the end of today's lesson, you should be able to define tense, identify the classes of tenses, identify verbs in their past tense forms, and use the past tense forms of verbs in sentences. Now let's go into our lesson. In our last class, we talked about verbs, and we did say that verbs are action words, and these action words occur or happen at different points in time. So an action can take place in the past, present, or future. Now remember that the verb is the part of speech which we use to express actions, which is what I've just explained. Now, in English grammar, when we talk about actions and the time the actions occur, we are referring to what is known as tense. So we can say that tense refers to the form or structure of verbs when they show different times of action. What this means is that verbs or actions take place at different points in time. And for those different points in time, verbs assume or take different forms. Now, the form a verb takes at a particular point in time, or the form a verb takes when it occurs or when the action occurs at a particular point in time, is known as the tense of that verb. The tense of a verb is divided into three basic or simple tenses. And these three tenses are known as the past tense, present tense, and the future tense. The past tense form of a verb is used to express or show actions that happened at some point in the past. The past is the key word. An action that happened or took place sometime in the past. The past can be some hours ago. The past can be yesterday. It can be last week. It can be last month, last year, as the case may be. But basically, the past simply refers to any time before the time you are speaking or before the time a sentence is expressed. For example, we have a sentence here which says, Nneka studied hard for her exams. The verb studied happened in the past. Nneka studied for her exams, meaning that she has finished studying for her exams. So the verb studied is a past tense verb. On the other hand, we use the present tense form of a verb to show or express actions that happen frequently, often, or always. We use the present tense to express actions that happen frequently, often, or always, not necessarily at the time when you are speaking, but it simply means that the action happens often, happens regularly. For example, Nneka studies hard for her exams. The verb studies is in the present tense because it indicates that Nneka studies. That is, she will study tomorrow. She studied yesterday, she will study tomorrow, and she keeps studying. That's what it means. The third tense here is the future tense, and it shows, or we use it to show that the action will take place at some point in the future. The action has not taken place yet, but it will take place at some point in the future. The future can be few hours from when you're speaking, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, as the case may be. For example, Nneka will study hard for her exams. Nneka has not studied hard for her exams yet, but she will study hard for her exams. So, will study expresses the future tense. Now let's look at what is known as aspects. What are aspects? Now in English grammar, we classify tenses based on a few factors. Now, these factors include whether an action has been completed, and this aspect is known as the perfect aspect. We also classify tenses based on whether an action is ongoing or whether it is continuous, and this aspect is known as the continuous or progressive aspect. We also classify tenses based on whether an ongoing action has been completed or will be completed, and this aspect is known as the perfect progressive aspect. So these are the aspects by which we classify tenses. They are known as aspects. But for the purpose of this lesson, we won't discuss the last aspect. We would see that aspect as we proceed into higher classes. Now, here on the board, we have a table showing the different aspects in relation to the tenses. On this column, we have the present tenses. Here we have the past tenses, and here we have the future tenses. Now, under this column, we have the simple present tense, the present perfect tense. Now, note that we have applied the perfect aspect into the present tense. So we have the present perfect tense. Now, when we apply the continuous aspect to the present tense, we have the present continuous or present progressive tense. And then when we add the perfect continuous aspect to the present tense, we have the present perfect continuous tense. The same goes for the past tenses. We have the simple past tense, the past perfect tense, the past continuous tense, and the past perfect continuous tense. And for the future tenses, we have the simple future tense, the future perfect tense, the future continuous tense, and the future perfect continuous tense. Now, remember that this lesson discusses past tenses. In our previous lesson, we talked about present tenses. So we will be looking at these tenses in our lesson today. Now, just like I said, for this lesson, we will discuss the simple past tense, the past perfect tense, and the past continuous tense. These are past tenses. First, let's look at the simple past tense. We use the simple past tense when we refer to actions that we started and completed in the past. This means that at the time of speech, the actions we are talking about have ended or are no longer happening. The simple past tense simply talks about actions that we started and finished at some point in the past. The action has finished happening. It no longer happens. It's no longer happening. So when we make sentences using such verbs, we are expressing that action in the simple past tense. For example, I studied hard for my exams last term. The verb studied is in the simple past tense because it refers to an action which has been completed. It started in the past and it has finished happening. I studied hard for my exams last term. The next sentence says, BC wrote her name neatly on the attendance sheet. Wrote is also in the simple past tense because it indicates or expresses an action that has been completed. My teacher gave me a gift because I passed my exams. Here we have two verbs in the simple past tense, the verb gave and the verb passed. They all refer to past actions. My teacher gave me a gift because I passed my exams. My teacher gave, meaning the action of giving has been completed, and I passed my exams. I'm no longer writing my exams. So the action of passing my exams has also been completed. The last sentence says, Nkem washed her plates after breakfast this morning. Nkem has finished washing her plates. So the verb washed refers to a completed action. It's also in the simple past tense. Now, to express the simple past tense, we place the past tense verbs after the subject of the sentence. And these verbs can either be regular or irregular. When we express sentences in simple past tense, we simply place the past tense verbs after the subject of the sentence. And these verbs can be regular or irregular. For regular verbs, the past tense forms usually end with the suffix ed or t. This is how to identify regular verbs. When you find verbs that in their past tense form, they have ed at the end or the letter t at the end, we can identify such verbs as regular. Now on the board we have some examples of regular verbs. The verb walk, in its past tense, is walked. We can find the suffix ed attached to the verb. The same goes for work, worked, finish, finished, scrub, scrubbed, wash, washed, learn, learnt or learned. Now note that here we have two forms. The form ending with the letter T and the form ending with ed. Pull, pulled, clean, cleaned, burn, burnt or burned. The same goes here. Two forms for the past tense of burn, burnt and burned. So these are regular verbs because they end with the suffix ed or t in their past tense forms. So any verb that takes ed in its past tense form or t can be identified as a regular verb. Now on the other hand, irregular verbs look different in their past tense form. This means that they do not take on the normal suffix ed or t, but they completely change their spellings or structure to form their past tense. Unlike the regular verbs, irregular verbs do not take on the suffix ed or t to form their past tense. They change their spellings or change their forms. So irregular verbs are just the opposites of regular verbs. On the board also we have some examples of irregular verbs. Sleep in past tense becomes slept, not sleeped. This would be wrong. The verb go is went in past tense, bring is brought, sell, sold, wear, wore, swim, swam, fly, flew, write, wrote, eat, ate, and hide, hid. So we find here that instead of taking on the suffix ed or t, these verbs change their spellings entirely when they are written in past tense. So these verbs are called irregular verbs. Now the second tense we'll be looking at is the past perfect tense. What is the past perfect tense all about? We use the past perfect tense when we need to express two actions that happened or occurred one after another in the past. When we have two actions that happened one after another in the past, we express such actions using the past perfect tense. The past perfect tense, we use the past tense form of the auxiliary verb have. And the past tense form of this verb have is had. So we use had together with the past participle form of the verb in the sentence as shown in the examples below. Now look at these sentences. We did say that we express the past perfect tense using the past tense form of the auxiliary verb have, which is had, before the verb. Now, whenever you have the past tense form of have, which is had, before a verb, that verb which comes after had will be the past participle form of that verb. Now, look at these examples on the board. I had studied in Italy because I won a scholarship. Here we have the auxiliary verb had and we have the action verb studied. So this verb studied is the past participle form of the verb. That is what happens when you find the verb had before a verb. Now this action, I had studied in Italy, happened after I won a scholarship. Remember that for the past perfect tense, we are referring to actions, two actions that happened one after the other. So the first action that took place here is that I won a scholarship. Won is the verb. Now after I won a scholarship, I studied in Italy. So that's why we said I had studied in Italy because I won a scholarship. The next sentence says, Toyin had arrived home before it rained. In this sentence, we also have two actions that were completed one after the other in the past. Toyin had arrived home before the rain. This means that she arrived home before it rained. So two actions, arrived and rained. And of course, we find the auxiliary verb had before the verb arrived. The next sentence says, my teacher had chosen me for the competition before I thought about it. We also have two actions here. The action of choosing me for the competition and the action of thinking about it. So, my teacher had chosen me for the competition. This action happened before I thought about it. Happened before this second action. And then again, we find the auxiliary verb had occurring before the past participle of the verb choose, which is chosen. Now, bear in mind that these sentences are different, though they express an aspect of the past tense form called the past perfect tense. Now, note that to express the past perfect tense, one action begins and ends before another action begins and also ends in the past. Another thing to note about the past perfect tense is that we use the past perfect tense to express negative sentences. We can use them to express sentences in the negative. Now, we make negative sentences when we say that something is not true, correct, or when an action did not take place. And this is done using the negative word not. When we mean to say that something is not true or something is not correct, or that an action did not happen, we use the negative word not to express this. And we can make negative sentences in the past perfect tense, which is our focus for this slide. Now let's look at some examples. I had not left for school when Bereni knocked on the door. I had not left. Remember that I said when we express sentences in the past perfect tense, we use the auxiliary verb had before the action verb, which is a past participle form of the verb. Now, to express negative sentences, we also have the auxiliary verb had and the main verb or the past participle verb after it. But before then, we have the negative word not, as we can see here. Tolu had not done her homework when the teacher requested for it. The same thing applies here. We find the auxiliary verb had. We also find the past participle of this verb, which is done. And then we find the negative word not, which makes these two sentences negative sentences. Now note that the negative word not is placed between the auxiliary verb had and the past participle form of the verb. This happens when we express sentences in the negative. If you look at the examples on the board, we find that the negative word not occurs between had and the past participle verb. This is how we express negative sentences in the past perfect tense. Also, we can make interrogative sentences with the past perfect tense. Interrogative sentences simply refers to questions. And you know that we ask questions to get responses or to get replies from our listeners. Now, how do we ask questions or make interrogative sentences in the past perfect tense? We ask questions in the past perfect tense when we want to find out if an action was completed before another action took place. Now, bear in mind that both actions took place in the past, but we are trying to find out if one action took place before another action took place. For example, had you collected the book from the library before they closed? Two actions, collecting the book from the library and the action of closing, or the fact that the library was closed. Here we also find the auxiliary verb had and the past participle verb collected. But the only different thing is that we find the subject of this question, which is you, subject, between the verb had and collected. Had Funke washed her clothes by the time father got home? Two actions, washing of her clothes and father getting home. We also have the auxiliary verb had and the past participle verb washed. But then again, we have the subject, Funke, occurring between them. The same goes for the last sentence. Had the exam started when Chiamaka arrived at school? Started is one action. Arrived is another action. So we want to know if the exam started before Chiamaka arrived at school. And then we have also the auxiliary verb had, the past participle verb started, and the subject of this sentence, which is the exam. Now note that when we ask questions or when we make interrogative sentences in the past tense, we use the auxiliary verb had to begin the question, as we can find on the board. Had, had, had. The auxiliary verb had always begins the question. Now apart from that, the subject is placed after that verb had and is followed by the past participle form of the verb, which is what we have on the board. After you begin the question with the auxiliary verb had, next thing you have is a subject. As we have here, the subject is you, here the subject is Funke, and here the subject is the exams. And just after the subject, we have the past participle form of the verb. So this is how we make interrogative sentences in the past perfect tense. Now let's talk about the past continuous tense. First of all, let's ask ourselves some questions. How would you respond to this question? What were you doing at 7:30 p.m. yesterday? You may say, I was eating. How would you also respond to this question? What was your sister doing in Nembe last year? We can say, she was teaching. Now observe these two replies. I was eating. She was teaching. We have was, and then the verbs are used ended in ing. So we answer these questions correctly by using an aspect of the past tense form called the past continuous tense. And we use the past continuous tense to express actions that started and continued for some time in the past, just like these replies I have here. Actions that continued for some time in the past. I was eating shows that the action of eating went on for some time. She was teaching shows that the action of teaching went on also for some time. Now let's look at some examples to further illustrate the past continuous tense. Ucheowaji was doing his homework after dinner? Was. Doing. Was is the past tense form of a be verb, and doing is the present participle form of the verb do. That's why it ends in ing. My cousins were going to the library at 3 p.m. This means that the action of going to the library went on for some time in the past. They were going. Ahmed was teaching me fraction last night. It means the action of teaching went on for some time last night. And of course, we have the past tense form of the be verb were. And in this sentence, we have the past tense form of the be verb was. Now, note that the time of the actions expressed is specific, though they continued or progressed for some time in the past. Now, look at these examples. Uchewaji was doing his homework when? After dinner. Specific time. He was doing his homework at a particular time in the past. After dinner. When were my cousins going to the library? At 3 p.m. The time is also specific. When was Ahmed teaching me fraction? He was teaching me fraction last night. The time is also specific. But they all refer to actions that went on for some time in the past. Now, still talking about the past continuous tense, there are times when we need to make sentences that express progressive actions interrupted by another action. For example, I was sweeping my room when the phone rang. This action of sweeping my room happened, and while it was happening, it was interrupted by the ringing of the phone. Now, note that for past continuous tense, we are simply expressing actions that were going on for some time in the past. And they usually end in ing. I was sweeping my room when the phone rang. The next sentence says, Father was coming home when it began to rain. Father was coming home, and this was interrupted by the rain. So these sentences are also expressed in the past continuous tense, which makes it another function of the past continuous tense, expressing ongoing actions in the past that were interrupted by another action. These sentences, like we said, have been expressed in the past continuous tense. And notice that the action that interrupted the other one was in progress and is expressed in the simple past tense. These ones here, these actions, when the phone rang, it began to rain, are expressed in the simple past tense. The actions that interrupted the ongoing action in the past are usually expressed in the simple past tense, just like we have on the board. Now, how do we express sentences in the past continuous tense? To express the past continuous tense, we use the past tense forms of the be verb. And the past tense forms of the be verb are the verbs was or were. These verbs are in past tense. We use these verbs with the present participle form of a verb that ends with the suffix ing. Present participle form, we use the past tense of the verb be, that is was or were, together with the present participle form of the verb. And we do know that the present participle form of the verb usually ends in the suffix ing. For example, Sikiratu was studying hard for her test. Here we find the past tense form of the be verb was, and we also find the present participle form of the verb study, which is studying, as we can see ing here. You were ironing your clothes before father called you. Here we find also the past tense form of the be verb and the present participle form of the verb iron, which is ironing. Bosade was doing her homework when it was time for lunch. Here also we find was, the past tense form of a be verb, and the present participle form of the verb do, which is doing. Now, the verb was is used when the subject of the sentence is singular. Please note this. We use the verb was in past continuous tense only when the subject is singular, just like we have on the board. Sikiratu was studying. The subject is Sikiratu, and Sikiratu refers to just one person. So we use the verb was. And then we use where when the subject of the sentence is plural or when the subject is the pronoun you. Just like the second example on the board, you were ironing your clothes before father called you. The subject of this sentence is you, so the rule states that the verb would be were. Now, if we had a plural subject, it would be they were, or Bosade and Tunji were ironing their clothes. So whenever we have two subjects or two or more subjects, or the pronoun you, the verb we would use would be were, not was. Was is only used when the subject is singular. Now, still talking about the past continuous tense, we use the past continuous tense to express negative sentences. And when we do, we show that an action was not ongoing at some point in the past. That is, when we express sentences in the negative in the past continuous tense, we mean that an action was not ongoing or an action did not go on for some time in the past. Let's look at some examples to further illustrate this. Sikiratu was not studying for her test. What does this sentence mean? It means that the action of studying for her test did not happen in the past. Sikiratu was not studying for her test. So we find here we still have the auxiliary verb was. We also still have the present participle form of a verb study, which is studying. And these two factors are key when we are talking about past continuous tense. We must have the auxiliary verb was or were, that is the past tense form of the verb to be, and the present participle form of the verb which ends in ing. So these two factors are key when referring to past continuous tense. But the only difference here is that we find the negative word not, which is the case whenever we make negative sentences. We must have the word not in the sentences. The second sentence says, you were not ironing your clothes before father called you. Here we are also trying to say that the action of ironing was not ongoing when father called you. So we find also the auxiliary verb were and the present participle form of the verb iron, which is ironing. And then we have the negative word not. Bosade was not doing her homework when it was time for lunch. The same goes here. Auxiliary verb, present participle verb, and then the negative word not. Owajima and Uchewaji were not sleeping when it was bedtime. Where past tense form of the verb be and the present participle form of the verb sleep. And then, of course, the negative word not. Now, when we express the past continuous tense in negative, we place the negative word not between the auxiliary verbs was or were and the form of the verb ending in ing, which is a present participle. That is just what I have illustrated in these sentences. We always find the negative word not occurring between the past tense form of the be verb was or were and the present participle form of the verb, which is the form of the verb that ends in ing. Also, we can ask questions in the past continuous tense. Questions, as we know, are interrogative sentences. When we ask questions, we are trying to get a reply or response from our listeners. And we can do this in the past continuous tense. When we ask questions using the past continuous tense, we simply want to know if an action was ongoing at some time in the past. This is the reason why we ask questions in the past continuous tense. We want to find out, or we want to know if an action was ongoing at some point in the past. For example, was Sikiratu studying for her test? This means we are trying to find out if the action of studying was ongoing at some time in the past. Was Sikiratu studying for her test? And then we find also here we have the auxiliary verb was, present participle verb studying, and the subject of this sentence between them. The same goes here. Were you ironing your clothes before father called you? This means, were you carrying out the action of ironing? Was it happening when father called you? We also have the auxiliary verb were, present participle verb ironing, and the subject between them. Was Bosade doing her homework when it was time for lunch? The same here, was. The subject is between was and the present participle verb doing. Now note that we begin the question with the auxiliary verbs was or were. When we ask questions in past continuous tense, we begin such questions with the auxiliary verbs was or were, and we do know that these are the past tense forms of the verb be or of the be verb. So we begin the questions with was or were, just like we have here. And then the subject comes after the auxiliary verb and is followed by the verb ending in ing, which is the present participle verb, just as we have here. The subject comes between the past tense form of the be verb and the present participle verb. We've come to the end of our lesson today on past tenses. Before we go to our test section, let's look at a few things we learned today. Today we learned that the tense of a verb is divided into three simple tenses: the present tense, past tense, and future tense. We also learned that in English grammar, we classify tenses into the following aspects: the perfect aspect, the continuous or progressive aspect, and the perfect progressive aspect. We learned also that past tenses in English grammar include the following: simple past tense, past perfect tense, past continuous tense. We have one more past tense which we did not look at for the purpose of this lesson. And then we learned lastly that the past perfect tense and the past continuous tense can be used to make negative sentences and also to ask questions, that is, interrogative sentences. Now let's go to our test for today. Our question for today says, what tense is the sentence below written in? I had finished the assignment before my teacher came into the classroom. Is it A, simple past tense, B, past continuous tense, or C, past perfect tense? The correct answer is C, past perfect tense. Remember I said that the past perfect tense is used to express the fact that two actions happened at some time in the past, but one happened before the other. And if you look at this sentence, I had finished the assignments before my teacher came into the classroom. We find two actions. I had finished the assignment and my teacher came into the classroom. So one happened before the other. I finished the assignment before the teacher came. So if you picked C, you are correct. And here we end our lesson today on past tenses. Thank you for watching and see you next time.